Not from stories. Not from pictures. He knew the way she kept the porch light on. He knew the soup she made when strangers came in from the cold. And when he said her name, he said it like someone who had been waiting years to say it out loud. The sky hadn't decided what it wanted to be yet. Not night. Not morning. Just a thin gray light stretched over the hill, like breath on cold glass. I parked where I always did, beneath the crooked pine that leaned east no matter how strong the wind came from the west. The engine clicked as it cooled. I sat there a moment longer than necessary, my hands still on the steering wheel, listening to the quiet settle back in. The cemetery always did that. It waited for you to arrive, then closed the door behind you. The flowers were on the passenger seat. Simple ones. I had wrapped them in yesterday's newspaper, the ink already smudging my fingers. I didn't read the headlines. I never did on days like this. The world could carry on without me for a few minutes. The gravel crunched under my shoes as I walked. Each step sounded louder than it should have, like I was interrupting something private. The gate stood open, rusted hinges sighing when I touched them. No sign said it was too early. No sign said I didn't belong. But the hour made it feel that way. The hill rose gently the way it always had. Headstones lined up in familiar rows, gray and white and worn smooth by weather and time. I could have walked it with my eyes closed. I had done it enough times. Same path, same count of steps, same pause halfway up where the ground dipped just a little. It all looked the same. That was the comfort of it. My mother liked routines. She believed they kept the world from slipping too far off its rails. I think that's why I came at dawn, because it was the only time the cemetery felt like it remembered her the way I did. Quiet. Claimed. I reached the turn near the old oak and slowed. Not because I was tired but because something felt off. The air shifted. Not colder. Just different. That's when I saw him. First I thought it was a shadow. The light was low, and the stones played tricks at that hour. But then I saw the movement, the small, careful bend of a shoulder. A human stillness. Someone standing where no one ever stood but me. He was at her grave. I stopped without meaning to. My foot hovered above the ground, unsure if it should land. The flowers felt heavier in my hands. I stayed there, half hidden behind another stone, watching like I'd stumbled into a room I wasn't meant to enter. The man didn't move. His head was bowed, hands close together in front of him. Between them, a small flame wavered. Candle. The kind you see in church corners or windowsills. Its light was soft but stubborn, glowing against the stone like it had something to say. The wind brushed past, gentle but sharp. The flame trembled, leaned, then steadied again. I watched it touch the letters carved into the granite, my mother's name catching the light, each curve briefly alive. I felt something tighten in my chest. This was my place. My time. My quiet agreement with the dead. And yet, the way he stood there didn't feel wrong. Felt careful. Like he was borrowing the moment, not stealing it. Still my feet wouldn't move. I wondered if I should turn back. Come another day. Let the stranger have whatever this was. But the flowers were already wilting at the edges, the paper damp from the morning air. I'd come too far. I always came too far. So I took another step. The gravel betrayed me again. Loud. Dark. Final. The man lifted his head slowly, as if he'd been expecting the sound. He didn't startle. Didn't rush. Just turned, inch by inch, the candle held steady in his hands. His face was older than I expected. Lines at the corners of his eyes. Gray threaded through dark hair. Nothing remarkable. Nothing familiar. But his gaze held me. Not with surprise but recognition. I stopped a few feet away. For a moment we just looked at each other. The space between us filled with breath and cold and the faint smell of wax. I noticed his coat was worn at the cuffs. Practical. Clean. The kind someone keeps for years. Then he spoke. Name. Not loud. Not tentative. Just said. Like he'd said it many times before. The sound of it here, on this hill between stones and silence, felt unreal. As if the ground had shifted slightly beneath everything I thought I understood. I didn't answer right away. My mouth opened then closed. The words stuck somewhere behind my teeth. How? I started then stopped. He nodded once, a small acknowledgement. Not an apology. Not an explanation. Just patience. The candle flame flickered again, casting shadows across his face and the stone behind him. For a heartbeat, my mother's name glowed between us, suspended in light. I come early, he said finally. His voice was low even. I didn't think anyone else would be here. Neither did I. I looked at the grave, then back at him. The flowers drooped in my hands, forgotten. My heart beat louder than the wind. I searched his face for answers, for familiarity, for something I'd missed all these years. There was nothing. And yet, everything felt suddenly connected. Do you know her? Yes. He didn't answer right away. His eyes dropped to the stone, to the name, to the dates carved beneath it. His thumb brushed the edge of the candle holder, careful not to touch the flame. Yes, he said. I do. The words settled between us, heavy and calm. I had 1,000 questions. None of them came out right. The cemetery seemed to lean closer, listening. Even the wind paused, as if waiting. I shifted my weight, unsure where to stand. Unsure if I should step closer or farther away. This man was a stranger. And yet he stood where only family stood. The candle burned on. I thought of all the mornings I'd come alone. All the silence I thought belonged only to me. And now, without warning, someone else was holding a piece of it. I looked down at the flowers in my hands, then back at the flame. The light touched my mother's name again, soft and steady. Who was he? And why had he come before the sun? The candle didn't go out when he turned. It bent slightly like it was listening too. I stood there with my breath caught halfway in, watching the flame trace his face as he faced me fully. The light climbed his jaw, softened the lines around his eyes, then settled back into the hollow of his collar. Morning was still undecided, and for a moment it felt like time had paused to let this happen properly. He didn't rush. Didn't ask who I was. He just looked at me the way someone looks at a place they've been before, careful not to disturb it. Then he said my name. Not loudly. Not as a question. He said it the way my mother used to when she wanted me to stop moving and listen. The sound of it landed wrong in the air. Heavy. Out of place. Like a stone dropped into still water. I felt it travel through me, down to my feet, where the gravel suddenly felt unstable. I shifted my weight without meaning to, my heels scraping the ground. My name did not belong here. Not on his tongue. Not between these stones. I started then stopped. My voice felt thin, like it hadn't been used yet today. I swallowed and tried again. Do I know you? He shook his head once. Low. Certain. No, he said. You don't. That should have ended it. That should have put everything back where it belonged. But it didn't. Because he hadn't asked who I was. And he hadn't sounded unsure. The candle flame wavered, then steadied again. Wax ran down the side in a thin, uneven line. I watched it instead of his face, afraid that if I looked too closely, something else might break loose. How do you know my name? Yes. The words came out quieter than I intended. This place had a way of lowering voices, like the ground itself insisted on respect. He didn't answer right away. He looked past me then, not through me but over my shoulder toward the path that led back down the hill, as if checking whether we were alone, as if the answer required space. I heard it once, he said finally. Where? Yes. His eyes returned to mine. There was no apology in them, no fear, just something settled, something finished. Here, he said. The silence after that stretched. I felt it press against my ears. Somewhere farther down the hill, a bird called once, then went quiet again. The wind lifted the hem of my coat and let it fall. I looked at the grave. At the letters carved deep enough to last longer than anyone who remembered her voice. My mother's name had been here for 5 years. Mine had never been. You heard it from her? Yes. He didn't nod. Didn't shake his head. He looked down at the stone instead, his gaze tracing the letters the way the candlelight had earlier. Yes, he said. A long time ago. The words rearranged something inside me. Not sharply, not painfully, just enough to be noticed. My mother hadn't spoken much about her life before me. She told stories in pieces like she was rationing them, and there were years she skipped entirely. Still, this felt impossible. She didn't talk much, I said without meaning to. A corner of his mouth lifted. Not a smile. More like recognition. She didn't have to, he said. I watched his hands then. They were steady. Older hands. Clean nails. The kind that knew how to hold things without dropping them. The candle rested easily there, like it belonged. I realized I was still clutching the flowers. The newspaper had torn slightly along the fold, one daisy stem poking through. I adjusted my grip, suddenly aware of how exposed I felt. Why are you here? Asked. He breathed out through his nose, slow and measured. The air fogged briefly between us. I come once a year, he said. Always early. For her. Asked. For what she did, he said. The distinction mattered. I felt it even if I didn't understand it yet. He stepped back half a pace, giving me space without stepping away from the grave. The candlelight stretched and thinned, then settled again. He placed the candle carefully at the base of the stone, shielding the flame with his hand until it stood on its own. When he straightened, his eyes met mine again. She told me your name that morning, he said. She said it like she was holding on to it. I pictured my mother saying my name the way she always had. Steady, unadorned, like it was something solid she could pass along. The thought tightened my chest. What morning? Asked. He looked at the sky then. The gray had begun to thin, light pushing gently through. Dawn was coming whether we were ready or not. A winter one, he said. Cold enough that the roads didn't feel real. I waited. He seemed to understand that. He didn't rush to fill the space. Some people are uncomfortable with silence. He wasn't one of them. I didn't know who you were, he continued. Not then. I only knew she wanted me to remember. Remember what? Asked. He looked at the grave again. The candle. The name carved there. That kindness doesn't always ask to be known, he said. The words settled softly. No wait. No demand. Just presence. I felt the urge to sit down. The bench nearby looked farther away than it should have. I stayed where I was, afraid that if I moved, the moment would tip one way or another. My name isn't common, I said quietly. You could have been mistaken. He met my eyes again. This time there was something like gentleness there. I wasn't, he said. The wind moved through the headstones, low and patient. The candle flame bent but did not go out. I realized then that I believed him. Not because of logic, not because of proof, but because my mother had always trusted people carefully and completely. I looked at her grave, the candle, at the stranger who knew my name. And for the first time since she'd been gone, I felt like there was something here that didn't belong to grief alone. Something unfinished, something waiting. Took a breath. Tell me, I said. And the hill listened. The light was still low enough to soften everything. Edges blurred. Colors held back. It made his face easier to study, and harder to place. I looked at him the way you look at someone you're sure you should know. Slowly, carefully, as if recognition might rise up on its own if you gave it enough time. His features were plain in a way that felt deliberate. A face shaped by weather more than age. Lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of squinting into distance, not smiling for cameras. Nothing stirred. No childhood memory. No neighbor's son grown older. No familiar echo. He wore a jacket that had seen better winters. The cuffs were frayed, the fabric dulled where hands had rubbed it smooth. Practical. The kind of thing someone doesn't replace until they have to. His shoulders were relaxed, not defensive. He stood as if the ground knew him. I waited for him to say something else, to explain himself, to apologize. He didn't. Instead, he looked down at the candle. The flame bent again as a breath of wind passed through the stones. He lifted one hand, not hurried, and cupped it gently around the light. His fingers were steady, no tremor. The flame calmed, straightened, and continued burning as if reassured. That small act did something to me. It wasn't reverence exactly. It was familiarity. People protect things they've protected before. "You come here often," I said. It wasn't a question. My voice came out even though my chest felt tight. He nodded once, still watching the flame. "Once a year," he said. "Always this early." "Why?" I asked. He glanced at me briefly, then back at the candle. The pause felt intentional, not evasive. "This is when it's quiet enough," he said. I understood that without asking what he meant. The cemetery had a way of filling up later. Visitors, murmured prayers, the sound of gravel under too many shoes. But dawn belonged to something older, something patient. My mother had liked early mornings for the same reason. She said the day told the truth before people woke up and started shaping it. I shifted my weight. The cold had begun to creep in through the soles of my shoes. My fingers ached where they gripped the flowers. "You didn't think anyone else would be here," I said. "No," he replied. "I hoped no one would." Should have sounded rude. Didn't. Sounded honest. He finally looked at me fully then, as if realizing courtesy required it. His eyes were dark, thoughtful, tired in the way that comes from years, not nights. When he met my gaze, he didn't flinch, didn't smile, didn't harden. He simply waited. I searched his face again, more carefully this time. There were faint scars near his knuckles. Old ones. A pale line near his jaw, half hidden by stubble. His skin held the color of someone who'd spent more time outside than inside. I tried to imagine him younger. Tried to bend his features into someone from my past. Nothing. And yet he stood there with a certainty I couldn't ignore. Most people, when they trespass on grief, carry some form of apology in their posture. Shoulders raised, eyes lowered, quick explanation ready. He had none of that. He didn't stand like a man who'd wandered into the wrong place. He stood like someone keeping an appointment. "You don't look surprised to see me," I said. That earned a faint crease between his brows. Not confusion. Consideration. "I was," he said. "Just not for long." That answer unsettled me more than if he'd denied it outright. I looked again at the candle, at the way wax had pooled around the base, thickening as it cooled. He hadn't brought flowers. Hadn't brought a photograph. Just light. Just fire held carefully against the cold. "What does it mean?" I asked, nodding toward it. He took a breath, slow and measured. I noticed then how he breathed, deep, controlled, as if used to waiting things out. "It's enough," he said. "For this." "For what?" "Press." He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Not new. Creased many times. He didn't open it. Just held it between his fingers for a moment, then slipped it back where it had been. I caught a glimpse of handwriting. Not his. The movement felt intimate, unintended. Like I'd seen something I wasn't meant to yet. "You don't have to explain," I said, though part of me wanted him to. He shook his head gently. "I do," he said. "Just not all at once." The wind picked up again, rustling the bare branches overhead. A few dry leaves skittered across the ground, sounding too loud in the quiet. He adjusted his stance, shielding the candle once more without looking at it. Muscle memory. That's when it struck me. He wasn't watching the candle to make sure it stayed lit. He was watching it like it was watching him, as if it carried judgment, or permission. My mother had believed in small rituals. Lighting a lamp before guests arrived. Leaving the porch light on for no one in particular. She said light helped people find their way, even when they didn't know they were lost. I felt something shift then. Not fear. Not anger. Just the slow realization that this man wasn't here by accident. Did she invite you? I asked quietly. He met my eyes again. This time something softened. No, he said. She didn't need to. I didn't know what to say to that. The truth of it sat heavy and familiar. My mother had a way of helping without announcing it. Of opening doors and pretending they'd always been open. I looked at the stone. Her name. At the candle burning steady beneath it. You seem very sure you belong here, I said. He nodded once. I am, he said. There was no arrogance in it. No claim. Just acceptance. I believed him. That realization startled me more than his presence ever could have. The sky above us had begun to lighten, the gray thinning into something softer. Dawn was pressing in gently, like a hand on a shoulder. I tightened my grip on the flowers. Who are you? I asked. He looked at the candle one last time before answering. Someone who remembers, he said. The flame flickered. And I knew then that whatever came next would change the shape of everything I thought I knew about her, and about myself. The candle burned behind me, but my mind had already moved elsewhere. Back to a kitchen that always smelled faintly of soap and warm bread. Back to mornings that began before the sun, when the house felt smaller and safer for it. My mother lived by routine the way some people live by prayer. She woke early, even when there was nowhere she needed to be. The kettle went on before the light. The radio stayed low, just enough to prove the world was still there. She folded laundry the same way every time. Sleeves tucked inward, corners squared, no rush. I used to think she did it all because she had to. Now I think she did it so nothing else would fall apart. She didn't complain. Not about work. Not about people. Not even about the weather, and we lived in a place where winter had opinions. If someone wronged her, she carried it quietly, like a bruise under a coat. I never heard her speak badly of anyone. If she couldn't say something kind, she'd say nothing at all. Silence was her language. Standing there in the cemetery, with a stranger's presence pressing gently at my back, I realized how much of my childhood had been shaped by what she chose not to say. There were no long stories about her youth. No photographs lined up on shelves. Just a few framed moments. A wedding picture where she stood slightly apart, a work photo taken under harsh lights, her smile polite but contained. She lived small, but not weak. She worked hard in ways that left no paper trail. Cleaning, cooking, showing up. The kind of labor that disappears as soon as it's done. She asked little of the world, and when she did, she asked quietly. I grew up thinking that was just who she was. Modest, private, uncomplicated. But now, with a candle flickering at her grave and a man I didn't know standing where I stood alone for years, that belief felt thin. I remembered her hands. Always busy. Always sure. She fixed buttons instead of replacing shirts. She reused jars. She saved string. Not out of fear, out of habit. Out of respect for things that still had life left in them. People too. She believed everyone carried a story they weren't ready to tell. And she treated them accordingly, patiently, without demand. I used to ask her questions when I was younger, about her childhood, about the years before me. She'd smile, that small closed smile of hers, and say, "Another time," or, "It wasn't important," or sometimes, "You don't need to carry that." I thought she was protecting herself. Now I wondered if she was protecting me. The wind moved through the cemetery again, stirring dry grass around the stones. I turned slightly, just enough to see the edge of the stranger's jacket. He hadn't moved. He gave me space without leaving. That felt intentional too. My mother liked giving people space. She said it helped them tell the truth when they were ready. I remembered the nights she stayed up later than usual, sitting at the table with a cup of tea gone cold. Papers spread out but untouched. Her eyes fixed somewhere far beyond the walls. If I asked what she was thinking about, she'd say, "Just remembering." She never said what. There were years of her life that existed only as gaps. Before she met my father. After he left. Between jobs. Between towns. I knew the outlines but not the details. It never bothered me before. Gaps are normal. Everyone has them. But now those gaps felt shaped. Frozen. I wondered how many mornings like this one she had lived through. How many dawns she'd spent carrying someone else's burden without ever letting it brush against mine. I looked down at her name carved in stone. The letters were simple. No flourish. No extra words. Just enough to mark where she rested. She would have liked that. The stranger shifted behind me. The soft sound of his shoe against gravel barely audible. I didn't turn. I wasn't ready yet. My thoughts were still too full of her. She taught me how to be quiet without being invisible. How to help without keeping score. How to leave a light on without waiting to be thanked. At the time I thought those were small lessons. Now they felt enormous. I thought of the nights she insisted I call when I got somewhere safely. The way she listened without interrupting. The way she never pushed when I pulled away. She gave love the same way she gave space. Steadily, without announcement. There were things she never told me. I was certain of that now. Not because of secrecy, but because she believed some acts belonged only to the moment they were done. Kindness didn't need witnesses. Good didn't need a ledger. The realization settled slowly, like dust after a door closes. I finally turned back toward the candle. The stranger was still watching it. His face calm, unreadable. The flame reflected in his eyes briefly, then faded as the light shifted. She was like that, I said mostly to myself. He nodded once. Yes, he said. She was. That simple agreement carried more weight than 1,000 explanations. He knew her in a way that didn't threaten mine. That surprised me. I felt a small ache then, not of loss but of wonder. The kind that comes when you realize someone you loved was larger than the version you knew. What else don't I know? I asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. He looked at the horizon, where the gray was finally giving way to something pale and hopeful. She didn't hide, he said at last. She chose. That distinction mattered. I breathed in the cold air, feeling it fill my chest, steady me. The cemetery no longer felt still. Felt awake. Listening. My mother had lived her life in small, deliberate ways. And now, standing here, I understood that those small choices had reached further than I ever imagined. I looked at the candle again. At the man who had come to honor something she never named. At the quiet morning opening around us. Whatever she had kept from me, I knew now it wasn't out of shame. It was out of care. And for the first time I felt ready to hear the rest. Even if it changed everything I thought I knew about her and about myself. The flame had settled into itself by then. No longer trembling. Just there. It stood between us. Small, steady, almost stubborn against the pale morning. I noticed how the wax had begun to pool at the base. Thick and uneven, like time collecting in one place. The air smelled faintly of it now. Warm and clean against the cold. He watched the candle the way people watch something they've entrusted with a secret. I light it every year, he said. His voice was quiet. Not cautious. Just measured. Like he was laying something fragile down on the ground between us. Always here. Yes. He nodded. Always dawn. I followed his gaze to the horizon. The sky had lightened enough that the outlines of the hills were clearer now. Still muted. Still gentle. Dawn was arriving slowly, as if it didn't want to interrupt us. Why dawn? Yes. He considered the question longer than necessary. I could see it in the way his jaw tightened slightly, the way his breath slowed. Because it's the only time that doesn't belong to anyone yet, he said. Not the living. Not the dead. That answer stayed with me. I thought of my mother again. How she used to say mornings were honest. That people hadn't had time to pretend yet. Maybe that was why this hour felt heavy with truth. He didn't say anything else for a while. Just stood there, hands loose at his sides now that the candle was set. He seemed older in the light, but also lighter. As if some part of him had been waiting for this moment all year, and now it had arrived. It matters to you, I said. Yes, he replied. Not defensive. Not dramatic. Just fact. I shifted my weight, the gravel biting through the soles of my shoes. The flowers in my hands had grown damp from the cold. One petal had fallen loose and rested against the stone near my mother's name. I crouched briefly to set them down, smoothing the newspaper without thinking. When I stood again, he was still watching the candle. You don't have to tell me, I said. Meant it. Some things feel better left untouched. He turned his head slightly, just enough to look at me. His eyes were thoughtful, almost apologetic. I know, he said. But if I don't, it'll feel unfinished. That word echoed. Unfinished. Understood that too. He took a breath. Long, careful. The kind you take before stepping onto uncertain ground. I didn't come here for a long time, he said. Not at first. Waited. There were years I thought about it, he continued. About her. About this place. But I stayed away. Why? Asked. He smiled then, but not with his eyes. Because gratitude can feel heavier than guilt, he said. The truth of that settled quietly between us. I'd felt it before, though I'd never named it. The way owing someone something good can feel harder than owing them nothing at all. So the candle, I said. It's a way back. Yes, he said. And a way of keeping my word. That caught my attention. What word? Asked. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he knelt down beside the grave, careful not to disturb the flowers I'd placed there. He adjusted the candle slightly, centering it so the flame wouldn't lean too close to the stone. I promised, he said softly, that I wouldn't forget. The wind moved through again, gentler this time. The flame dipped but held. Forget what? Asked. He rested his forearms on his knees, eyes level with the candle now. That some kindness doesn't come with names attached, he said. That some help isn't meant to be returned, only remembered. I felt a tightening in my throat. My mother's voice echoed in my head, saying almost the same thing in her own way years ago. I hadn't understood it then. He stood again, brushing his hands together once, as if dusting off the past. I didn't know her long, he said. But long enough. The phrase lingered. How long? Asked. Long enough to change the direction of things, he replied. I looked at the candle again. At the way its flame leaned slightly toward the stone, as if drawn there. The image felt deliberate, symbolic in a way that didn't need explanation. You come back every year, I said. Even when no one knows. He nodded. Especially then. There was something unsettling about that devotion. And something deeply moving. To return again and again to a place that offered no recognition. No reward. Just memory. Does it ever feel lonely? Asked. He considered that, eyes narrowing slightly against the light. Sometimes, he said. But not empty. I let that sit. The cemetery was waking up now. Birds calling farther off. The faint sound of a car passing somewhere below the hill. Life resuming at a respectful distance. I thought of all the anniversaries I'd marked here alone. All the candles I hadn't lit. All the promises I'd never realized existed. What happens when the candle burns out? Asked. He followed my gaze to the flame. Then it's done, he said. Until next year. Simple. Complete. He reached into his pocket again and pulled out a small matchbox. The label worn smooth. He turned it once in his hand, then put it away without opening it. I keep it with me, he said. All year. For this? Asked. For the remembering, he replied. I felt a strange sense of relief then. As if something I hadn't known was missing had quietly been accounted for. My mother's kindness, unseen, unrecorded, had not vanished into the air. It had landed somewhere solid. The candle crackled softly. I watched the flame, thinking of the promise he mentioned. Thinking of how many promises my mother had kept that I'd never known existed. Will you tell me someday? Asked. What she did. He met my eyes again. This time there was no hesitation. Yes, he said. When the time is right. He nodded. I trusted that answer. The sky had shifted to a pale blue now, streaked with thin clouds. Dawn had fully arrived. The moment we'd been standing inside was thinning, becoming part of the day. He glanced at his watch, then back at the candle. I should go, he said. I didn't argue. He took one last look at the flame, then at the stone, his expression unreadable. He stepped back, giving the candle space to burn on its own. As he turned to leave, he paused. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? Yes. For letting this belong to her, he replied. He walked away down the path, his steps slow, unhurried. I watched until he disappeared beyond the trees. The candle continued to burn. And I stood there, realizing that some promises are kept not with words, but with return, with presence, with flame. Snow makes its own kind of quiet. Not silence exactly. More like a held breath. Standing there beside my mother's grave, with dawn thinning the dark, I felt that quiet return to me as he began to speak. It was a winter like this, he said. I followed his eyes as they drifted somewhere far beyond the headstones, beyond the hill, back into years I could not see. The candle's flame bent toward him, as if listening. Cold enough that engines didn't forgive mistakes, he continued. Cold enough that people stayed home unless they had no other choice. I said nothing. I didn't want to interrupt whatever door had just opened. He shifted his weight, hands tucked into his jacket sleeves, fingers hidden. His voice stayed calm, but something underneath it tightened, a careful pressure like ice forming slowly. My car stopped on a stretch of road that didn't have a name, he said. Just trees. No. And a ditch that kept filling back in. I could see it without trying. The kind of road my mother used to drive on when shortcuts felt safer than highways. The kind of place where help didn't pass by unless it meant to. I had my son with me, he said. The word landed softly, but it changed the air. He was small, the man went on. Too small to understand why the heater wasn't working anymore. He kept asking if we were almost home. I felt my shoulders tighten. I pressed my hands together inside my coat pockets, the cold suddenly sharper. He had a fever, the man said. The kind that makes a child go quiet. I knew that quiet. Every parent does. I wrapped him in everything I had, he continued. Jackets, blankets, a scarf that still smelled like the coffee I spilled on it that morning. He let out a breath, slow and controlled. I tried the phone, he said. No signal. I tried pushing the car. It didn't move. Snow kept coming like it had all the time in the world. The candle crackled faintly. Wax slipped down its side, hardening as it went. I don't know how long we were there, he said. Time does strange things when you're afraid. I glanced at my mother's name carved in stone. The letters seemed sharper now, as if the cold had etched them deeper. I remember thinking, he said, that if I fell asleep I might not wake up. And if I didn't, neither would he. The words were steady, but his jaw tightened when he finished the sentence. He didn't look at me. He didn't need to. I started walking, he said. Carried him. One step, then another. The snow was up past my calves. Every breath burned. I pictured it. A man stumbling through white, carrying a small weight that felt heavier with every step. The image pressed against something inside me, old and familiar. I don't know how far I went, he said. But I remember seeing a light. He paused. Just one, he added. Yellow. Steady. Like someone had left it on for no reason at all. My heart gave a small, sharp pull. That light, he said, and for the first time his voice wavered slightly. That light was your mother's kitchen window. I didn't speak. I didn't breathe. She opened the door before I knocked, he said. As if she'd been expecting us. The wind moved through the cemetery, soft but insistent. The candle flame leaned, then steadied. She didn't ask questions, he continued. Didn't ask who I was or why I was there. She took him from my arms like it was the most natural thing in the world. I saw it then. My mother's hands, sure, practiced, gentle. The way she lifted things without hesitation. She laid him on the table, he said. Wrapped him in quilts. Put water on the stove. Told me to sit. I swallowed. She spoke quietly, he went on. Not because she was afraid. Because she didn't want to scare him. That was her. Always that. She touched his forehead, the man said. Clucked her tongue once. Went to the cupboard without looking. Everything she needed was already there. I thought of the shelves at home. Always stocked. Always ready. As if she believed someone might arrive at any moment. She found aspirin, he said. And a thermometer that still worked. She didn't rush. She didn't slow down. She just moved. The candle burned lower now, the flame drawing closer to its end. I felt the cold on my cheeks and realized my eyes were wet. I stood there, he said, useless, watching her save my child. The word echoed. She stayed up all night, he continued. Sat beside him, changed cloths, whispered things I couldn't hear. I wondered what she'd whispered. Maybe nothing important. Maybe everything. At some point, he said, she asked his name. And then she asked mine. He paused then. The longest pause yet. And then, he said softly, she asked about you. My breath caught. She asked what I called my daughter, he said. Said names matter. Said they anchor us. That sounded like her too. I told her, he continued. And she smiled. Just a little. Like she was tucking it away. The cemetery felt impossibly still. Even the birds seemed to have gone quiet. When the roads opened, he said, she packed us food. Gave me directions I didn't need. And then she said something I've never forgotten. Waited. She said, one day when you can remember this. Not me. Just this. The words landed gently, but they carried weight. I tried to find her again, he said. Years later. But the town had changed. People moved on. I knew then that he wasn't guessing. He wasn't filling in gaps with hope. He was remembering. I looked at my mother's grave. The candle. At the man who had carried this story alone for decades. Could this be her? A part of me whispered. Another part already knew the answer. She never told me, I said quietly. He nodded. She wouldn't, he said. That wasn't why she did it. The sky had brightened fully now. Daylight pressed in around us, gentle but undeniable. My son lived, he said. He grew. He has children of his own. He glanced at the stone again. And every winter, he said, I come back to say thank you. The candle flickered one last time, then steadied. I stood there, the story settling into me, reshaping the past. My mother's silences no longer felt empty. They felt full. Full of nights like that one. Full of doors opened without being asked. Full of light left on for strangers in the snow. I looked at the man. And for the first time I didn't resist believing. Not because I wanted the story to be true, but because everything about her had always pointed to it. The candle burned on. And I knew the next truth would be harder still. The morning had fully arrived by then, but the light still felt hesitant. Ill. As if it wasn't sure it was welcome yet. The candle between us burned low, its flame small but stubborn. I watched it as the stranger spoke again. His voice quieter now, almost careful with what came next. The house, he said, sat back from the road. I felt my chest tighten. Not far, he continued. But enough that you had to mean it when you turned in. I lifted my eyes to him. There were 3 steps, he said. Concrete. Chipped at the edges. The middle one dipped a little, so you learned to step over it. My throat went dry. He didn't look at me. He didn't need to. He was somewhere else now, standing in a memory that had never been mine to share. The door stuck in the winter, he said. Swelled from the cold. She leaned into it with her shoulder. That image slid straight through me. My mother's shoulder. The small grunt she made when would refuse to cooperate. When it opened, he went on, warmth came out first. Not heat. Warmth. I closed my eyes without meaning to. The kitchen was to the left, he said. You could see it from the doorway. A table that had been sanded too many times. One leg shorter than the rest. My fingers curled inside my gloves. There was soup on the stove, he said. Something simple. Potatoes, maybe. It smelled like it had been there a while. My mother's soup. Always waiting. Always enough for one more bowl. She took my son straight there, he said. Didn't carry him upstairs. Said stairs could wait. I remembered those stairs. Narrow. Loud. They complained at every step like they wanted to be noticed. There was a lamp, he said. Just one. He finally looked at me then. Yellow light, he said softly. By the sink. The world tilted. She left it on, he continued. Even when the rest of the house slept. Said darkness shouldn't surprise anyone. I pressed my lips together. That was something she used to say. Not often. Just enough that it stayed. The cabinets didn't match, he said. One was newer. Didn't quite fit. I felt something break open in my chest. Slow, painful. She apologized for the blankets, he said. Said they were old. Said old was better anyway. I remembered those blankets. Heavy. Smelled faintly of soap and thyme. They scratched, but they held warmth like it mattered. She never asked my name, he said. Not once. He smiled, but not with his eyes. She asked if my son was breathing okay. Asked if he'd eaten. Asked if I could stay awake. The candle flickered. There was a clock, he said. Above the door. Tick too loud. I kept watching it, like time would do something useful if I stared hard enough. That clock had stopped years before we moved out. My mother never fixed it. Said it still worked, just not for now. She sat with him, the man said. On a chair pulled close. Didn't rock. Didn't fuss. Just Saturday. That was her way. Present. As if panic was a thing you could refuse to invite in. At some point, he said, she brought me a bowl too. Pushed it toward me without looking. I swallowed. She said, eat. You can't help anyone empty. I almost laughed. Almost cried. The sound stayed trapped somewhere in between. She listened, he went on. Not just to him. To the house. Every sound. The wind moved through the cemetery again, colder now. I felt it slip through my coat like a hand searching for seams. She knew when the fever broke before I did, he said. Touched his forehead once. Smile. Just a little. I could see that smile. I'd seen it 1,000 times growing up. The one she saved for quiet victories. She washed the cup she'd used, he said. Dried it. Put it back exactly where it came from. Order mattered to her. Even in chaos. When morning came, he said, the light outside didn't look real. Everything too white. Too clean. Snow does that. Makes the world pretend it hasn't been messy. She packed food, he said. Bread wrapped in cloth. Soup in a jar. Said glass keeps promises better than plastic. Felt my chest ache. She stood in the doorway, he continued. Didn't wave. Just watched until the car moved. I remembered that doorway. How she stood there long after goodbyes. As if leaving first felt rude. I wanted to ask her name, he said. I didn't. He paused. Some things, he said, you don't name because you're afraid it might make them smaller. The candle was nearly gone now. Wax pooled around its base, thick and uneven. I tried to forget the details, he said. Life gets loud. Memories fade. He looked at me again. But they didn't, he said. They stayed sharp. Like they were waiting. I felt tears spill then. Silent. Unapologetic. How could you know all this? I whispered. He didn't answer right away. I didn't come back for years, he said. When I did, the house was gone. My heart clenched. Empty lot, he said. Grass trying to grow where it remembered walls. He nodded. Seen it too. The space where home used to stand. pretending it had never been anything else. I stood there, he said. And I realized something. Waited. She didn't do what she did to be remembered, he said. She did it because it was there to be done. The candle went out. Smoke rose in a thin, pale line, twisting into the cold air. I come here, he said quietly, because this is what's left. I looked at my mother's grave, at the space around us, at the light now fully risen, honest and clear. Everything he knew, only family should have known. And yet, she had made him family, if only for one winter night. My throat tightened with a truth I couldn't undo. She hadn't just raised me. She had been leaving lights on for strangers all along. And standing there in the open morning, I understood something I wasn't ready to say out loud. Some houses don't disappear. They move. And the yellow light, it was still on. The cemetery had settled into a quieter light by then. Not brighter, just steadier. The kind of morning that doesn't rush you. That lets you stand too long with your hands empty and your thoughts loud. I kept looking at my mother's name carved into the stone, tracing the letters with my eyes the way I used to trace the seams on her hands when I was small. She never wore rings. Said they got in the way of work. Said skin remembered better without them. The man stood a few steps back now. He'd given me space without asking if I wanted it. That felt like something she would have done. She never told me, I said finally. My voice sounded unfamiliar. Not once. The words hung there between us, fragile as frost. I searched my memory the way you search old drawers. Slow, careful, hoping something forgotten might still be useful. There were stories she told more than once. Little ones, neighbors, church suppers, long bus rides. But that winter night, it wasn't there. Not in the kitchen. Not over folded laundry. Not whispered when she thought I was asleep. She didn't mention you, I said. Or the boy. Or the storm. The man nodded like he'd been expecting that answer. She wouldn't, he said quietly. I looked at him then. Really looked. The lines in his face weren't sharp. They were worn down like they'd been rubbed smooth by time and repetition. He held his hands together in front of him, fingers laced, knuckles pale from the cold. I came back once, he said. Years after. The wind moved again, tugging at the grass, bending it in the same direction. I drove by, he continued. Didn't stop. Waited. I told myself it was better that way, he said. That showing up late didn't count as showing up at all. I thought of my mother's clock. How it stopped and started again when it felt like it. I had the words ready, he said. Practiced them. Thank you. Oh you. I'll never forget. He shook his head. But they felt too big, he said. Too heavy to place in someone else's hands. The candle stub sat cold now at the base of the stone. Wax hardened into shapes that didn't mean anything but still felt important. I was ashamed, he said. Not because of what she gave, but because of how long it took me to understand it. Shame. My mother knew that word. Never used it to punish. Only to warn. She didn't keep records, I said. Didn't write things down. Smiled a small one. She barely kept receipts. He let out a quiet breath. Not a laugh. Something close to relief. She didn't ask for anything, he said. That's what made it worse. I knew what he meant. Kindness that asks nothing back doesn't leave you a place to put your gratitude. Just stays with you. Follows you. He grew up, the man said. My son. Turned. He doesn't remember her face, he said. Just warmth. Just the feeling that someone stayed. That sounded like her. I told him about her later, he said. When he was old enough to understand that strangers can save you. I felt my chest tighten again. He asked why she helped, the man said. I didn't know what to tell him. I thought of all the questions I never asked my mother. All the answers she never offered. She chose it, I said softly. That's all. The man nodded. Low. I waited, he said. Years kept passing. And the waiting didn't make it lighter. It made it heavier. Gratitude does that. Settles into you. Becomes part of your weight. I was afraid, he said, that if I spoke it out loud, I'd owe her something I could never finish paying. I understood then. My mother had lived her life like that. Giving without creating debt. Loving without keeping score. She didn't want credit, I said. No, he agreed. She wanted you. The words landed gently. Still they hit. The silence between us grew thick, not awkward. Full. Like a room after everyone leaves but the feeling stays. I used to wonder, I said, if there were parts of her I never saw. I swallowed. Turns out, I said, there were whole lives she lived quietly. The man looked at the ground. She made it easy to forget her, he said. In the best way. I remembered how she never posed for pictures. How she stepped out of frames. How she waved people forward. She chose kindness, I said, without witnesses. The wind softened. Somewhere far off a bird called once, then stopped. I come here, the man said, because this is the only place I know where my thank you won't disturb her. That felt right. She liked peace. Didn't like fuss. She would have told you, I said, that you didn't owe her anything. He smiled then. Real one. Tired. I know, he said. That's why I do. I looked at my mother's name again. The stone hadn't changed. Never did. But something around it had loosened. She never spoke badly of anyone, I said. Even when she had reason. The man nodded. She taught me something, he said. Without teaching. That was her way. We stood there longer than necessary. The cold crept in slow, patient. I should go, he said eventually. I didn't stop him. Before he turned, he placed something at the base of the stone. Not flowers. Not money. A folded piece of paper. I wrote it, he said. The words. I didn't pick it up. Maybe, he said. This time they can rest. He stepped back, then turned away, his footsteps quiet against the path. I stayed. The paper stirred once in the breeze, then settled. I thought about all the things my mother never said. All the kindness she placed into the world without leaving her name on it. Maybe silence had been her signature. I knelt and smoothed the grass where the candle had burned. Some gifts are meant to be given quietly. Some thanks are meant to arrive late. And standing there with the morning fully awake, I realized something else. What she never said was still being spoken. The light had changed again. Not brighter. Just softer. As if the morning had learned something while we weren't looking. The fog thinned along the edges of the cemetery, lifting in slow strands. The stones stood clearer now, their names less guarded. I noticed how many of them were small. How many dates ended too early. The man was still there. He hadn't rushed his words before, and he didn't now. The boy lived, he said. No pause for effect. No weight added. Just a sentence placed gently on the ground between us. I felt my breath catch anyway. He's grown now, the man continued. Has his own hands. Strong ones. He looked down at his own palms, turning them once like he was checking the proof. He works with engines, he said. Always fixing what other people give up on. That sounded like survival. That sounded like inheritance. He doesn't remember the fever, the man said. Doesn't remember the snow or the car stalled sideways across the road. I did. Not because I was there. But because my mother always smelled faintly of winter when she came inside. Cold air and something burned. He remembers the soup, the man said. The way it steamed up his glasses. He remembers falling asleep on a floor that wasn't ours. Closed my eyes. Could see it. The pot on the stove. The chipped bowls she never replaced. The way she would tuck a blanket without waking you. He asks sometimes, the man said, why things turned out the way they did. Waited. I tell him, the man said, that someone chose to stop. That was all. The wind moved again, slower now. It pressed gently against my coat, as if to check whether I was still there. I looked for her, he said. After. The word stretched. After could mean years. After could mean regret. I asked around, he said. Stopped at places I thought she might pass through. Churches. Stores. He shook his head. She didn't leave tracks, he said. That was true. My mother moved like that. Through rooms. Through lives. I was always a day late, he said. Or 10 years. I thought of how she hated being waited on. How she stood before anyone else could offer. I didn't find her, he said. Not while she was living. The sentence settled heavy, then softened. I found this, he said, gesturing around us. Eventually. The stone. The ground. The quiet. I didn't come right away, he said. Didn't feel like I had the right. I felt something inside me tilt. Not pain. Something warmer. So I lit the candle, he said. Once. He looked at the hardened wax. The wick bent into itself. And then again. I thought of how my mother reused everything. How nothing was wasted. Not even gestures. It became easier, he said. Not lighter. Just steadier. The candle flickered in my mind again and again, each year at dawn. He's alive, the man said, softer now. Because someone decided a stranger mattered. My chest tightened. That kind of debt, he said, doesn't disappear. I looked at my mother's name carved into stone. How plain it was. How unadorned. She didn't do it for that, I said. I know, he said quickly. I know. He swallowed. That's what makes it harder, he said. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of breaths not taken. Words not needed. My grief changed, I said, surprising myself. He looked at me. It used to feel sharp, I said. Like something unfinished. Pause. Now it feels wider. The man nodded. Pride can feel like grief, he said. At first. That landed somewhere deep. She lived small, I said. Worked, came home, slept. She lived enough, he said. We stood side by side now. Not close. Not far. I used to think legacy was loud, I said. Buildings. Stories people tell. The man shook his head. Legacy is a warm floor, he said. On the worst night of your life. Smiled. Real one. Surprised me. He never knew her name, the man said. My son. I felt a flicker of something, not anger, not sadness. She would have liked that, I said. She didn't like being known. She is, he said. Every time he keeps going. The cemetery had fully woken now. Somewhere a gate creaked. A distant car passed, unaware. He asked me once, the man said, who she was to us. Waited. I told him, he said. She was the reason he could ask the question. That felt like enough. The man took a step back, as if the moment had reached its edge. I'll keep coming, he said. If that's all right. He nodded. She won't mind, I said. She liked company that didn't stay too long. He smiled then. Grateful. Unburdened in a way that looked earned. He turned to go. I watched him walk away. His shape thinning into the morning. Stayed. The grief I carried didn't leave. Shifted. Settled into something warmer. Something that didn't ache when I breathed. I knelt and touched the stone. Cold. Solid. Certain. Alive because of a simple decision. I thought of all the choices she never spoke about. All the nights she came home later than expected. This was her legacy. Not a name remembered. But a life continued. As I stood to leave, the wind lifted once more. Just enough to stir the grass. And for the first time since she died, I didn't feel like I was saying goodbye. I felt like I was being introduced. The candle had burned down to a shallow cup of wax. The flame was smaller now, but steadier, as if it had learned the wind and decided not to fight it. Two of us stood there side by side. Not touching. Not needing to. The cemetery had shifted into its late morning quiet. The kind that comes after the birds have said their first words, and before people arrive with fresh flowers and heavier grief. The light lay flat against the stones, turning their edges soft. For the first time since I arrived, I didn't feel like I was standing alone. I could feel my mother there. Not in the way people talk about, not as a presence pressing down. More like an echo. A repetition of small kindnesses that never fully fade. She had always been like that. Never entering a room loudly. Never leaving behind a mess of emotions. Standing beside the stranger, though he didn't feel like one anymore. I understood something I hadn't before. Loss didn't always have to hurt to be real. Sometimes it just changed shape. I remembered how she used to stand at the sink, drying one plate at a time, even when there were many. How she never rushed, even when there was nowhere else to be. I used to think that meant she had nothing waiting for her. Now I wondered if she simply knew when to stay. The man shifted his weight slightly, careful not to step too close to the stone. He kept his hands folded in front of him, as if he were still waiting for permission to be here. The candle flickered. He watched it with a kind of focus that felt earned. Not hope, not fear. Something quieter. I didn't know if I should speak, he said at last. His voice was low, respectful of the space. I didn't answer right away. I never wanted to disturb anything, he added. This place. Or you. He nodded. She wouldn't mind, I said. She was good at sharing silence. He smiled at that. Small one. The kind that doesn't ask for anything back. We stood there without speaking for a while. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of understanding that didn't need words. I thought about all the times people expect grief to demand something. An apology, a confession, a confrontation. As if pain must always end in a reckoning. But this felt different. This felt like two people standing near the same truth, arriving from different roads. I've said thank you before, the man said, almost hesitantly. But I don't think I said it right. He turned slightly toward me then, but didn't look directly at my face. His eyes stayed on the stone. Thank you, he said, for letting me be here. The words were simple, careful, as if he were afraid of stepping wrong. I felt something settle inside me. You don't need permission, I said. She never asked for it. That seemed to land. His shoulders dropped just a little, like he'd been holding something up for a long time without realizing it. The candle sputtered once, then steadied again. I remembered how my mother used to relight candles when they leaned too far to one side. How she'd cup the flame with her palm, shielding it from drafts. She never scolded the flame for flickering. She just helped it last. I didn't expect. The man began, then stopped. He shook his head. I didn't expect to meet you, he said finally. Neither did I replied. We shared a brief look then. Not searching. Not defensive. Just human. Standing there, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. Not relief exactly, but acceptance. The kind that doesn't arrive with fireworks. The kind that comes quietly and sits down beside you. My grief had always felt solitary. Something I carried alone because it belonged to me. To our history. To the life only she and I shared. But now I saw it differently. Some grief doesn't divide. Some grief connects. The wind moved through the grass again, bending it slightly toward us. The flame leaned but didn't go out. She did good, the man said. It wasn't a grand statement. It didn't need to be. She did, I agreed. And for the first time, saying it didn't feel like defending her. It felt like acknowledging something already true. He took a step back then, respectful again of distance. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small box of matches. Worn at the edges. I leave them here sometimes, he said. In case someone else needs a light. I thought of my mother's kitchen drawer. The way it was always half open, full of things she thought might be useful someday. She'd like that, I said. He placed the box carefully at the base of the stone, not touching it. I'll come again, he said, not asking. He nodded. She'll be here, I said. She always is. He smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. When he finally turned to leave, I didn't feel the usual tightening in my chest that comes with endings. I watched him walk down the path, his steps unhurried, his back straight. He didn't look back. Neither did I. I stayed a while longer. Long enough for the candle to burn down to nothing but smoke and a darkened wick. Long enough for the air to cool again. I knelt once more, resting my fingers against the stone. It felt the same as it always had. Cold, solid, patient. But I didn't feel empty. I felt accompanied. As I stood to go, the cemetery gates creaked in the distance. Someone else had arrived. Another story. Another reason to stand quietly with the past. I walked away without rushing. Behind me the candle was gone. But the light wasn't. The flame was already thinning when he left. Not gone, just quieter. It bent once in the morning air, then stood straight again, as if it had made its decision. The man didn't wait to see how it ended. He nodded once, small and certain, and walked away before the cemetery fully woke. I watched him go until his shape folded into the path and disappeared behind the old oak trees. Then there was only me, the stone, and the candle. The day was changing its voice. Somewhere beyond the fence, a car door closed. A bird lifted from the grass, startled by its own shadow. The fog had almost gone now, leaving the ground damp and dark, as if it remembered the night. I stayed where I was. I didn't feel abandoned. I felt entrusted. The candle sat low in its pool of wax, the flame barely taller than a fingertip. I crouched near it, careful not to block the air. The heat brushed my skin, gentle and alive. My mother would have liked that it was allowed to finish on its own. She never rushed endings. I thought of how many mornings she'd risen before the house. How often I'd woken to the sound of nothing, just the quiet proof that someone had already moved through the day. There were so many hours of her life I never witnessed. So many decisions she made without an audience. I used to think that meant they didn't matter. Now I knew better. The stone looked the same as it always had. Her name didn't glow. The dates didn't change. The earth didn't soften because I understood more now. But the silence was different. It wasn't empty anymore. It felt layered. Like something had been added without disturbing what was already there. I placed my hand flat against the stone. Cold. Steady. I didn't know, I whispered. The words weren't an apology. They weren't regret. They were acknowledgement. The candle flickered again. Once. I remembered how my mother used to leave porch lights on for no one in particular. How she said it was safer that way. How she never explained who she thought might need it. I wondered how many strangers had passed through her life without leaving a mark, and how many left marks I'd never see. The flame shrank further, curling in on itself. I didn't intervene. Some things deserved to finish naturally. As I sat there, memories surfaced quietly. Not dramatic ones. Just moments that hadn't made sense before. The extra blankets folded in the hall closet. The soup she always made too much of. The way she paused when telling stories, as if deciding what not to say. She wasn't hiding. She was choosing. Kindness without credit. Help without ownership. The candle finally gave up its light. Not suddenly. Just slowly. The wick darkened. The flame folded inward. Smoke rose, thin and brief, then vanished into the air. I didn't feel loss when it went out. Felt completion. I stayed a while longer. Long enough for the cemetery to fill with the soft sounds of other lives intersecting grief. Footsteps, murmurs, the rustle of plastic wrapping around flowers. No one noticed me. That felt right. When I finally stood, my legs were stiff, but my chest felt lighter. Not healed. Not finished. Just settled. I brushed dirt from my coat and took one last look at the grave. I'll come back, I said. Not as a promise. As a habit. Walking toward the gate, I passed other stones. Other names. Some familiar. Most not. I wondered how many stories like this lived quietly beneath them. How many acts of good had gone unnamed, unremembered, but not undone. The world doesn't always announce its kindness. Sometimes it leaves it burning in the cold, hoping someone will notice before it's gone. The gate, I paused. The wind shifted again, lifting the grass behind me. For a moment I thought I smelled soup. Or maybe just damp earth and pine. I didn't turn back. Carried it with me. Later at home I found myself leaving a light on without thinking. Setting out an extra cup. Holding a door a moment longer than necessary. Small things. Inherited things. That night before sleep, I thought about the man's son. About engines repaired. About warmth borrowed and returned across decades. I thought about how truth doesn't always arrive when it's useful. Sometimes it arrives when it's gentle. The grave will look the same tomorrow. And the day after that. But I know now what stands there with her. Not silence. But the quiet good that keeps moving forward. Unseen, unclaimed, and still alive. And somewhere because of her it always will be.